The alarms on the trade station were screaming before I even stepped off my shuttle. I am Karith, second daughter of the Vantalar Dominion, and I have walked through 100 stations across 100 worlds. I know the sound of a station in trouble. This was not that sound. This was something stranger. Every alarm was flashing. Every officer was frozen at their post, and not one of them looked afraid. They looked confused. On a station this size, confusion is far more dangerous than fear, because fear tells you to run, and confusion tells you nothing at all. My guards fell into position around me, hands resting on their weapons, eyes scanning every corridor. I raised a hand to stop them from drawing anything further. Whatever this was, it did not smell like danger yet. It smelled like a mistake, and mistakes, I have learned, are far more interesting than danger. I had come to this station for one reason. The newest species to join the Concord had just been given docking rights here, and my father wanted a report on them before the full council wasted a season debating whether they were worth the trouble. Everyone already had an opinion. The trade guilds called them backward. The scholars called them promising but slow. The military attaches, the ones who actually mattered, called them harmless. A species barely a century past its own homeworld, with no war fleet worth naming, sitting at the very bottom of every combat index the Concord kept. I had read the reports twice. I believed them completely. That is the first mistake I will admit to in this telling, because it will not be my last. A young officer from station security finally noticed me and hurried over, bowing quickly before catching his breath. "Your Highness, I apologize. We were not told you would arrive during the drill." "The drill," I repeated. "Yes, the humans requested it. A structural integrity test, they called it. Their liaison insisted on running it the moment their ship docked." I looked past him at the chaos in the corridor, at officers still trying to silence alarms that had been triggered on purpose, by request, by a species everyone told me had nothing to prove and nothing to test. I felt something shift very slightly in my chest, the way it does right before a hunt begins, though I did not yet understand why. "Take me to their liaison," I said. He led me through 2 more corridors before we reached a viewing deck that overlooked the docking bay. A single human stood there, alone, watching his own ship through the viewport as engineers scrambled around him, shutting down alarms one panel at a time. He did not turn when I approached. He did not bow. He simply watched his ship, arms folded, as if the noise around him belonged to someone else's problem. "You must be Corporal Hoyt," I said. He turned then, and I saw a face far younger than I expected, and far calmer than I expected even more. There was no tension in it, no performance of confidence, the kind lesser diplomats wear like armor. Just quiet attention, the way you look at weather you have already decided not to worry about. "Princess Kiraith," he said, "I did not expect royalty to greet the drill in person. I did not expect a species requesting entry to the Concord to run emergency drills the moment they arrived at a station that is not theirs." He almost smiled, almost. "Where we come from, you test the walls before you trust them. Doesn't matter whose station it is. If something is going to fail, better it fails now, while we are watching, than later, while we are not." It was a reasonable answer. Too reasonable, perhaps, for a species my briefings described as instinctive rather than calculating. I filed the thought away and did not let it show on my face. "Your species is new to us," I said. "I have been sent to observe you before my father's council votes on your continued presence in conquered space." "I know," he said. "I read the same reports you did. Bottom of every list you keep. You are not offended? Why would I be? You haven't seen us do anything yet." He said it simply, without pride, without complaint, the way someone states a fact about the weather. It should have reassured me. Instead, it left a strange itch at the back of my mind, small and persistent, like a word I could not quite remember. We spoke for a while longer, about small things, about the drill, about the station's schedule, and the entire time I found myself studying him the way I would study a locked door. Not because I suspected anything hidden behind it, because I could not tell if it was locked at all, or simply closed, or not a door in the way I understood doors to be. That evening, my personal advisor, Lord Farron, came to my quarters with the day's reports. He was an old friend of my father's, careful and precise, the kind of advisor who had outlived 3 princes and grown only more cautious for it. The humans ran an unscheduled drill upon arrival, he said, reading from his tablet. Station security is filing a complaint about the disruption. Let them file it, I said. What else? Nothing else of note. Their delegation is small, 12 crew, 1 liaison, minimal weapons registered, and their ship specifications match exactly what the Concord database has on file. There is truly nothing remarkable here, Your Highness. I would not spend more than a day on this assessment. I should have agreed with him. Every fact he listed pointed toward the same conclusion my father's council had already reached before I ever left home. A minor species, recently arrived, of little consequence beyond curiosity. And yet I kept returning to the image of Corporal Hoyt, standing still in the middle of chaos he had caused himself, watching his ship the way a parent watches a child who is perfectly capable of standing on its own. Lord Farron, I said, have you ever met a species that tests its own walls before anyone forces them to? He considered this for a long moment. No, Your Highness. I cannot say that I have. Neither have I. He smiled the patient smile he always gave me when he thought I was chasing shadows. You have always had a gift for finding mysteries where there are none, Princess. It is why your father trusts your reports more than mine. But I would caution you here. Sometimes a drill is simply a drill. I let him believe I agreed. I did not tell him about the itch at the back of my mind, because I did not yet have words for it either. The following morning, Station Traffic Control informed me that a second vessel had requested docking clearance, one that made every officer on duty go quiet the moment its registration cleared the system. I did not need to ask which species it belonged to. I had grown up hearing stories about them before I had grown up at all. Stories meant to frighten children into behaving. Stories that turned out, unlike most childhood warnings, to be entirely true. The Threnzai were coming. I had seen Threnzai vessels only twice in my life, both times from a great distance, both times with my father's entire fleet standing between us and them as a courtesy neither side ever openly admitted was necessary. They were the closest thing the galaxy had to an agreed apex, not because any single treaty declared it, but because every species that had ever tested them had learned, in whatever way survivors learned such things, not to test them twice. I made my way to the observation deck immediately and found Corporal Hoyt already there, watching the same viewport as before, the same calm folded arms, as though nothing at all had changed since yesterday. I stood beside him without asking permission, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. You know what is docking, I said finally. I read the manifest same as you did, and you are not concerned. He turned to look at me, and for the first time I saw something behind his eyes that was not quite calm and not quite fear either. It was closer to recognition. The way you look at a familiar shape in unfamiliar light. Princess, he said, I have been asked that question in one form or another my entire life. I have learned it is easier to answer with a question of my own. Concerned about what, exactly? About predators, I said, who have never once needed to retreat from anything. He looked back toward the viewport, toward the growing shape of the Threnzai vessel sliding into its assigned berth, and this time when he spoke, his voice had dropped lower, quieter, the way a person speaks when they are choosing every word with unusual care. Everything retreats from something, he said. Even predators. They just haven't met the right something yet. I did not understand what he meant. I would understand very soon. Behind us, the station's alarms had long since gone silent, the drill from the day before nothing but a memory logged in a maintenance report somewhere. But the itch at the back of my mind had grown into something sharper now, something closer to certainty, though certainty of what I still could not say. I only knew that for the first time since arriving at this station, I did not feel like the one doing the observing. I felt observed. And for a Vantalar princess who had spent her whole life being the one who watched, who assessed, who decided which species deserved a seat at the Concord's table, that feeling was entirely new. It sat uneasily in my chest as I watched the Threnzai vessel's docking clamps engage with a heavy, final sound, like a door closing somewhere far away that I had not realized was still open. Whatever this station had been the day before, it was not that anymore. And whatever Corporal Hoyt was, I was beginning to suspect it was not what the reports had told me either. The Threnzai delegation stepped off their vessel exactly on schedule, and the entire docking bay went quiet in a way I had never heard a crowd go quiet before. There were 7 of them. I had expected more, given the size of their ship, but I would learn later that Threnzai never traveled in large groups. They did not need to. Each of them stood taller than any Vantalar guard I had ever commanded, moving with a kind of unhurried precision that made everyone around them feel as though they were being measured, even when no one was looking directly at them. Their leader wore markings across his shoulders that I did not recognize, though Lord Farron, standing beside me with his tablet trembling slightly in his hands, informed me under his breath that they marked him as a pack elder, one of the oldest and most respected hunters among his kind. Their travel documents list this as a cultural exchange, Lord Farron whispered, nothing more. Nothing about the Threnzai is ever nothing more, I said. I had grown up on stories about them, the way every child in the Dominion had. Stories about worlds that welcomed Threnzai visitors with open trade routes and closed them a season later with quiet, permanent silence. Stories that were, I had always assumed, exaggerated the way old stories tend to be. Standing there, watching the pack elder's eyes move across the docking bay like he was reading a menu rather than a room full of people, I understood for the first time that the stories had not been exaggerated at all. If anything, they had been kind. Station officials rushed forward with the customary greetings, offering docking privileges and hospitality suites, and the pack elder accepted everything with a polite stillness that somehow felt more unsettling than open hostility would have. He thanked them in careful, correct Concord trade language, and his eyes drifted, almost lazily, toward the small human delegation standing near the far wall. I followed his gaze and found Corporal Hoyt there, standing with 2 other humans I had not yet met, a tall woman with steady eyes, who I would later learn was Captain Laura Bennett, and a younger man beside her, who kept glancing at the Threnzai with open curiosity rather than fear. None of them moved. None of them looked away either. The pack elder's attention lingered on them for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned back to the station officials and continued the conversation as though nothing at all had happened. But I had seen it. And more importantly, I had seen how Hoyt had not reacted to being seen. That evening, the station arranged a formal welcome gathering in the central atrium, the kind of polite theater every Concord world performs for new arrivals, full of careful conversation and carefully poured drinks. I attended because protocol demanded it, and because I wanted to watch what happened when Predator and newcomer were placed in the same room without the excuse of a docking bay's formality to keep them apart. The Threnzai pack elder introduced himself to me first, as protocol required, given my rank. His name, translated as closely as the Concord systems could manage, was Draith. He spoke well, complimented my father's reputation, asked polite questions about the Dominion's recent trade agreements. He was, in every measurable way, an excellent guest. "Your Highness," he said, after the pleasantries had run their course, "I understand you have taken a personal interest in the newest species to request Concord membership." "I have been asked to submit an assessment," I said, "nothing more." "An assessment." He said the word slowly, as though tasting it. "A wise practice. Every pack tests new territory before deciding whether to claim it or ignore it. I imagine your father's council does the same, in its own way. We do not test species the way your kind tests territory, Elder Draith." He smiled, and it was not an unpleasant smile, which somehow made it worse. "Do you not? Every species tests every other species, Princess. The methods simply differ. Yours involves reports and councils, and long deliberation. Mine involves something more immediate, but the purpose is the same. We are all trying to learn what something is capable of before we decide how much space to give it." He glanced across the atrium then, toward where Hoyt stood speaking quietly with Captain Bennett, and something in his expression sharpened, just slightly, the way a hunter's expression sharpens when the wind shifts and carries a new scent across a clearing. "They are calm," he said, almost to himself. "Should they not be? Calm is not the natural response to us, Princess. Fear is natural. Aggression is natural. Calm is a choice, and choices tell you far more about a creature than instinct ever does." He looked back at me. "I intend to test that choice before this gathering concludes. I hope you will not think it rude." I felt Lord Farron stiffen beside me, though he said nothing. I understood, in that moment, exactly what kind of test Elder Draith meant. The Threnzai were known for a particular ritual, one whispered about more than documented, a controlled provocation meant to reveal how a species responded under sudden pressure. It was not violence, not in the way my Dominion's laws would define it. It was closer to a performance, a deliberate display of dominance, meant to force a reaction, any reaction, that a predator could read and judge. I should have intervened then. Protocol gave me every right to do so, as a representative of a hosting power overseeing a diplomatic gathering. But some part of me, the part that had been itching since the moment I met Corporal Hoyt, wanted to see what would happen. I told myself it was for the report. I am no longer entirely certain that was the whole truth. Elder Draith crossed the atrium with unhurried steps, and conversation quieted in ripples ahead of him, the way water quiets before a large shape moves beneath its surface. He stopped directly in front of Hoyt, close enough that the gesture alone would have made most beings in that room take a step back. Captain Bennett's hand drifted, almost imperceptibly, toward her side, though she did not draw anything. The younger human beside her went very still. Hoyt did not step back. He did not step forward either. He simply looked up at Elder Draith, meeting his eyes directly, the way very few species in that room would have dared. "Elder Draith," Hoyt said, his voice carrying just far enough for those nearby to hear. "Welcome to the station." "You are not afraid," Draith said. "It was not a question. Should I be? Every reasonable creature in this room is afraid of me, Corporal. It is a sensible response. Fear keeps small things alive around large ones." Hoyt tilted his head slightly, considering this with the same unhurried patience I had watched him use on me the day before. "Where I come from, Elder, being the biggest thing in the room was never a guarantee of being the most dangerous thing in it. We learned that lesson a long time ago, usually from creatures a lot smaller than us. It changes how a person responds to size." Unquote. The atrium had gone almost completely silent now. Even the station's ambient music seemed to fade into the background, as though the room itself understood something was happening that deserved its full attention. Draith studied him for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in something closer to careful recalculation. "That is an interesting answer," he said finally. "Most creatures answer with either fear or false bravado. You have offered neither." "I am simply telling you what I know," Hoyt said. "You are the biggest predator in this room, Elder Draith. I do not doubt that. But size was never the thing that decided who survived on my world. Patience was. Preparation was. Knowing exactly what you are facing before you decide whether to run or stand was." "And do you know what you are facing?" "I am still deciding," Hoyt said, and for the first time that evening, something like a real smile touched his face. "You have not given me quite enough to work with yet, Elder, but I imagine you intend to." A ripple of tension moved through the gathered Threnzai delegation, subtle enough that I doubt any other species in that room noticed it. But I had spent years learning to read predator body language across a dozen worlds, and I saw it clearly. It was not offense. It was something closer to surprise, an emotion I would not have guessed the Threnzai were capable of showing so plainly. Draith said nothing further for a long moment. Then he inclined his head, the smallest fraction of a bow, the kind of gesture I had only ever seen Threnzai offer to one another, never to outsiders. "We will speak again, Corporal Hoyt," he said. "Enjoy the gathering." He turned and walked back across the atrium, his pack falling into step around him, without a word needing to pass between them, and the room slowly exhaled the breath it had been holding. Lord Farron leaned toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your Highness, did you see that gesture he made?" "I saw it. I have studied Threnzai diplomatic behavior for 30 years. I have never once seen them offer that gesture to a species outside their own kind." I said nothing, because I had no explanation to offer him. I only knew that the itch at the back of my mind had sharpened into something that felt, for the first time, less like curiosity and more like the beginning of understanding. Whatever Corporal Hoyt's species truly was, it was not sitting quietly at the bottom of any list by accident. Something had been overlooked, and I intended to find out exactly what. 3 days passed before Elder Draeth made his next move, and I spent every one of those days watching the human delegation more closely than I watched anything else on that station. I told Lord Farron it was thoroughness. I told my father, in a brief coded message sent through the Dominion relay, that I needed more time before submitting my assessment. Neither statement was entirely honest. The truth was simpler and harder to explain in a formal report. I could not stop thinking about the way Elder Draeth had looked at Corporal Hoyt, the way a hunter looks at tracks it does not recognize, curious rather than dismissive. The station's public gardens sat near the center of the ring, a wide-open dome planted with vegetation from a dozen member worlds, kept as a shared space where delegations could walk without the formality of council chambers pressing down on them. I had gone there that morning simply to clear my head, and found to my surprise that Captain Bennett and 2 of her crew were already there, walking the paths with the unhurried ease of people who had nowhere urgent to be. I approached them without my guards, a decision Lord Farron would later scold me for, though I did not regret it. "Princess," Captain Bennett said, inclining her head, "come to observe the newcomers again." "Something like that," I admitted. There was little use pretending otherwise with her. She had the same quality Hoyt did, a way of looking at you that made dishonesty feel like wasted effort. "May I ask you something plainly, Captain? Please. Your species has been part of the Concord for less than a season. Every report I have read describes you as new, unprepared, and largely unfamiliar with how a galaxy this crowded operates. And yet nothing your people have done since arriving here matches that description." She considered the question for a moment, glancing toward the dome's high transparent ceiling, where the far shape of the docked Threnzai vessel was visible against the dark. "We are new to the Concord," she said. "That part is true. We have never sat at your council tables, never signed your treaties, never learned your particular customs for greeting a foreign delegation. In that sense, your reports are accurate. We are beginners here. And yet," she agreed, with the faint trace of a smile, "being new to a room does not mean you are new to everything that might walk into it." Before I could ask what she meant, the garden's ambient lighting flickered once, briefly, in a pattern I recognized immediately as a station-wide security alert being suppressed at the source, rather than broadcast openly. My guards would not have caught it. I had spent enough time around the Dominion's own quiet emergencies to know the signature of a threat someone was trying to manage without causing a panic. Captain Bennett noticed it too. Her posture did not change, but something behind her eyes sharpened, the same quiet shift I had seen in Hoyt during the welcome gathering. "Elder Draeth," she said, not as a question. We found out how right she was less than 2 minutes later, when station security finally broadcast an alert to nearby personnel, myself included. A Threnzai hunter, one of Draeth's pack, had entered a restricted maintenance corridor near the human delegation's assigned quarters, ostensibly lost, though everyone with any sense understood immediately that a Threnzai hunter does not simply become lost. I moved quickly toward the corridor, my guards catching up to me at last, and arrived to find a small crowd of station personnel already gathered at a respectful distance, none of them quite willing to approach further. Corporal Hoyt stood near the front of that crowd, along with 2 of his crew, and directly ahead of them, filling most of the narrow corridor with his presence, stood the Threnzai hunter. He was younger than Draeth, leaner, with the restless energy of a predator still building its reputation rather than resting on one already earned. He had positioned himself in a way that left no comfortable path around him, only through, and his eyes were fixed entirely on Hoyt with an intensity that made even my own guards shift uneasily behind me. This was the test. I understood it the moment I saw it, the same ritual provocation Elder Draith had warned me about during the gathering, except this time delivered not through words but through simple, immovable presence. The hunter did not need to threaten anything aloud. His body did all the speaking required. Step forward and prove you are willing to challenge me. Step back and prove you understand your place. I opened my mouth to intervene, to invoke whatever authority my rank carried on a station under partial dominion oversight, but Lord Farron's hand closed gently over my arm. "Wait, Your Highness," he whispered. "If you interrupt now, you may cause exactly the incident you are trying to prevent. Let it play out. The corporal has handled worse than this already." I did not know if that was true, but something in his voice told me he believed it, and against every instinct I had developed over years of diplomatic caution, I stayed my hand and watched. Hoyt studied the hunter for a long moment, unhurried, the same careful patience he had shown Draith days before. Then, instead of stepping back, instead of stepping forward, he did something I had not expected at all. He simply crouched, lowering himself to one knee in the narrow corridor, bringing his eyes level with a point somewhere below the hunter's chest rather than his face. The gesture confused everyone watching, myself included. It was neither submission nor challenge, neither retreat nor advance. It occupied a space between the two that none of us had a name for. "You are testing whether I run," Hoyt said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the narrow space. "I understand why. Where I come from, we test things the same way, though usually with claws a bit less impressive than yours." He held perfectly still as he spoke, his posture calm, deliberate, almost gentle. "But where I come from, a creature that lowers itself like this isn't giving up. It's letting you see exactly how it plans to move if it needs to. No sudden motion, no hidden intention, just patience, and a clear view of what happens next." The hunter's posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, a slight retreat of weight from his forward leg to his back one, the kind of adjustment a predator makes when a prey animal fails to behave the way prey animals are expected to behave. "You do not run," the hunter said. It was the first time he had spoken, his voice lower and rougher than Draith's had been. "No," Hoyt agreed, "and I am not going to fight you here either, not because I could not, but because there is no reason to. You are testing what I am. I am telling you plainly. That is more honest than either of us pretending otherwise with claws or fists." For a long moment, nothing happened at all. The corridor held its breath, myself included, as the young hunter studied Hoyt with an intensity that seemed to search for something specific and not immediately find it. Then, slowly, deliberately, the hunter took a single step backward. It was not a large step, it barely shifted his position in the corridor at all, but I felt Lord Farron's grip tighten on my arm, and I understood, even before he whispered it to me, exactly how significant that small motion truly was. "Your Highness," he breathed, "Threnzai hunters do not retreat from a test they initiate. Not ever, not in any account I have studied in 30 years of service." The hunter said nothing further. He simply turned and walked back down the corridor, the way he had come, his pace unhurried, his posture giving nothing away, though something in the set of his shoulders suggested a creature recalculating an assumption rather than one who had simply lost interest. Hoyt rose slowly from his crouch, brushing off his uniform with the same unbothered calm he had carried since the moment I first met him, and turned to find the small crowd staring at him in open astonishment. "Show's over," he said, with the faintest trace of a smile. "Everyone back to work." The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring amongst themselves, and I found myself standing frozen at the edge of the corridor, staring at the empty space where the hunter had been, my mind turning over the same question again and again, without finding an answer. What could make a Threnzai hunter step back? I had spent my entire life believing I understood the shape of the galaxy's hierarchy, which species stood where, which ones commanded fear, and which ones commanded pity. I had walked into this assignment certain of exactly where humanity belonged on that ladder, near the very bottom, harmless, new, a curiosity rather than a concern. Watching that hunter retreat, I understood for the first time that I had been standing on a ladder whose true shape I did not understand at all. That evening, I did something I had not done since arriving at the station. I requested access to the Concorde's restricted historical archive, the deep records kept from public view, the ones reserved for matters of security assessment rather than casual curiosity. Lord Farron looked at me with genuine surprise when I told him, "Your Highness, those records require formal justification. What exactly are you hoping to find?" I thought of Hoyt, kneeling calmly in that corridor, of Captain Bennett's quiet words in the garden, of Elder Draith's careful bow, offered to a species he had no reason to respect. I thought of the itch at the back of my mind, finally beginning to take a shape I recognized. "The truth, Lord Farron," I said. "Something in those reports we were given is missing, and I intend to find out exactly what it is." The archive terminal in the station's administrative wing hummed quietly as I waited for my clearance to process. Lord Farron, standing beside me, with the wary patience of someone who suspected we were about to open a door neither of us could close again. "Restricted access approved," the console finally announced. "Vantalar Dominion Assessment Clearance. Level 3. Please specify search parameters." "Species designation human," I said. "Full historical record. Unfiltered." The console hesitated for a moment, a small pause that meant nothing to most users but told me, given my years of experience with Concorde systems, that the request had triggered a secondary review somewhere in the archive's automated hierarchy. Then the data began to load, far more of it than I had expected for a species the Concorde's public profile described in barely 2 paragraphs. Lord Farron leaned over my shoulder as the first files opened, and I heard him draw in a slow breath as the scale of it became clear. The public profile my father's council had reviewed was, I now understood, not simply incomplete. It had been carefully trimmed, the way a gardener trims a plant to show only the shape someone wishes visitors to see, leaving the roots entirely out of view. The first thing I found was a simple geographic survey of humanity's homeworld, a planet called Earth, and the sheer density of competing life recorded there stopped me for a long moment. Where most Concorde worlds I had studied supported 1 or 2 dominant predator lineages that had shaped their native species toward caution and cooperation, Earth's survey listed dozens, entire families of creatures built for speed, for strength, for patience, for numbers, layered across every environment the planet offered, from its deepest waters to its highest ranges. "Lord Farron," I said quietly, "how does a species survive to build civilization on a world with this much competition?" He had no answer. Neither did the archive, not directly, but as I moved deeper into the records, a pattern began to emerge that no single document stated outright, yet became unmistakable the longer I read. Humanity had not survived Earth by avoiding its predators. They had survived by learning them, tracking them, understanding their patterns so completely that eventually the predators became the ones who needed to be cautious. There were records of ancient practices, preserved almost as curiosities in the Concorde's cultural database, describing small groups of unarmed or lightly equipped humans deliberately pursuing some of the most dangerous creatures on their world, not out of desperation, but as a demonstration of skill passed down across generations. The archive's own commentary, written by some long-ago Concorde researcher who clearly had not grasped the significance of what they were cataloging, described these practices as ceremonial curiosities, historical footnotes of little continuing relevance. I found myself staring at that phrase for a long time, little continuing relevance. "They classified it as folklore," I said aloud, mostly to myself. "An old species custom, nothing more." "Perhaps it was," Lord Farron offered, though his voice carried little conviction. "Elder Draith did not bow to folklore, Lord Farron. Neither did his hunter retreat from a memory." I continued reading through the night, and the deeper I went, the clearer the true shape of things became. It was not any single fact that changed my understanding, not one document or record that explained everything at once. It was the accumulation of dozens of small details the Concord's public summary had simply chosen to omit, each one meaningless on its own, devastating together. I found records of humanity's early conflicts among themselves, conflicts the Concord's summary described only as a brief historical footnote before the species achieved global unity, without ever detailing the scale or duration of what that footnote actually contained. I found records of humanity's expansion into hostile environments, oceans and mountains and frozen wastes that most species would have simply avoided, approached instead as problems to be studied and eventually solved. I found records, buried deep in an appendix clearly written by someone more thorough than whoever compiled the official summary, describing humanity's relationship with its own technology, a species that had built weapons capable of ending their own civilization entirely, and had chosen, deliberately and repeatedly across generations, not to use them, not because they lacked the will, but because they had learned, through hard and costly experience, exactly what such a choice would cost everyone, including themselves. They are not calm because they underestimate the Threnzai, I said slowly, the pieces settling into place as I spoke them aloud. They are calm because they have already stood in rooms far more dangerous than this station, and they know exactly what that calm is worth. Lord Farron sat down slowly in the chair beside the terminal, his tablet forgotten in his lap. Your Highness, if this is accurate, then the Concord's official assessment is not simply incomplete, it is dangerously wrong. Every trade agreement, every diplomatic posture, every military calculation built on the assumption that humanity sits at the bottom of the Concord's hierarchy has been built on a foundation that does not exist. Worse than that, I said, Elder Draeth already knows it does not exist. I believe he knew from the moment his ship docked. I thought back to the welcome gathering, to the careful, deliberate way Draeth had tested Hoyt with words rather than force, the way he had studied him, not as a curiosity, but as something closer to an unfamiliar variation of a category he already understood deeply. Predators recognize other predators, I realized, not through official reports or Concord classifications, but through something older and far more reliable. They recognize the particular stillness of a creature that has already made peace with violence long before ever needing to use it. Fear moves, aggression postures, but that specific, settled calm, the one Hoyt had carried since the moment I met him, was not the calm of ignorance. It was the calm of experience. I continued my search until the station's artificial morning cycle began, and near the very end of the deepest records I could access, I found a single line buried in an old Concord field researcher's private notes, appended almost as an afterthought to an otherwise dry survey of Earth's biosphere, written decades before humanity had ever developed the capability to leave its own world. The researcher had written, in careful and slightly nervous script, that Earth's dominant species appeared to have achieved something the researcher had never observed on any other surveyed world. They had not eliminated their planet's most dangerous predators through conquest or extermination. They had, in most cases, simply outgrown the need to fear them, while leaving those same predators fully capable of remembering exactly why they had once been feared at all. I sat back from the terminal, the weight of everything I had read finally settling fully into place. Lord Farron, I said quietly, send a message to my father. Tell him the assessment will be delayed. For how long, Your Highness? Until I understand exactly what we have been calling a beginner species. He nodded slowly, already reaching for his tablet, though I could see the concern still sitting heavily behind his eyes. Your Highness, if Elder Draeth already suspects the truth of this, what do you believe he intends to do about it? I thought of the young hunter's careful, deliberate retreat in that narrow corridor, of the way his pace had never once suggested defeat, only recalculation. I thought of Elder Draeth's quiet, measured bow, a gesture I now understood was not respect offered freely, but respect offered cautiously, the way one predator acknowledges another it has not yet fully measured. I believe, I said slowly, that Elder Draeth has not yet finished his assessment either. And I believe his final test has not happened yet. I was right. It would happen the very next day, in front of the entire station, in a way that would leave no room left for quiet retreats or careful recalculations. It would happen in front of everyone, and there would be no mistaking what it truly meant. I spent the remaining hours before dawn preparing not a formal report for my father's council, but something closer to a warning, because I understood now, with a clarity that had been building since the moment I first watched Corporal Hoyt stand still amid chaos he had caused himself, that whatever was coming would not be settled through diplomacy alone. It would be settled the way the Threnzai settled everything that truly mattered to them, through a test that could not be misunderstood by anyone watching, and an answer that would change how every species in that room understood the shape of the galaxy's true hierarchy, whether they were prepared for that understanding or not. The final challenge came without warning, exactly as I had feared it would, in the station's largest gathering hall, during what was meant to be a routine ceremony marking humanity's formal application for continued Concord observation status. I stood near the front of the hall beside Lord Farron, watching delegates from a dozen member worlds settle into their assigned seats, none of them aware of the tension coiled quietly beneath the ceremony's polished surface. Captain Bennett stood at the podium, midway through a brief and carefully worded statement about her crew's experiences since arriving in Concord space, when the hall's main doors opened without announcement. Elder Draeth entered first, and behind him came the rest of his pack, all 7 hunters this time, moving together with the same unhurried precision I remembered from their arrival days before, except now there was nothing casual in it at all. Every step carried purpose. Every eye in that hall turned toward them as they crossed the floor directly toward the podium, and I felt the entire room's collective breath catch at once. Captain Bennett paused mid-sentence, her hands resting calmly on either side of the podium, watching the approaching pack with the same steady patience I had come to recognize as her species' particular signature. Draeth stopped a short distance from the podium and addressed the room, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the hall without need for amplification. "Forgive the interruption," he said, and though his words were polite, nothing about his posture suggested an apology. "But before this Concord grants further standing to this species, my pack requests the right to complete our assessment, in accordance with the old customs recognized by this council when dealing with newly arrived predator species." A murmur swept through the gathered delegates, and I saw several of them glance toward my seat, silently asking whether the Dominion intended to intervene. I did not move. I had already decided, somewhere in the long hours before dawn, that whatever happened here needed to happen without interference, because interference would only delay a reckoning that was clearly coming regardless. "The Threnzai request is recognized," the ceremony's presiding officer said carefully, glancing between Draeth and Captain Bennett with obvious unease. "Captain, you are not obligated to accept this challenge. It carries no binding weight under current Concord law." "I understand," Captain Bennett said calmly, "but I think Elder Draeth and I both know that refusing would answer his question just as clearly as accepting it would, so let us not pretend otherwise. Elder Draeth, what would you have us do?" Draeth studied her for a long moment, and then deliberately turned his attention toward Corporal Hoyt, who stood quietly near the edge of the gathered delegation. "Corporal," Draeth said, "you are the one who knelt before my hunter 3 days ago. I would have this assessment completed with you." Hoyt stepped forward without hesitation, moving to stand a short distance from Draeth, close enough that the entire hall could see them both clearly, far enough that neither crowded the other. The room had gone entirely silent now, every delegate leaning forward slightly, every guard's hand resting near a weapon no one truly expected to need, though no one seemed entirely certain of that anymore either. "Elder Draeth," Hoyt said quietly, "I believe I already answered your question in that corridor." "You answered part of it," Draeth said. "You showed me a creature who does not run, but not running is not the same as understanding what you face. I have met creatures before who stood their ground simply because they did not know enough to be afraid. I must know which kind of creature you are." Hoyt was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost none of its calm, but something in it had shifted, becoming heavier, more deliberate, the voice of someone choosing to share something rarely spoken aloud. "Elder Draith," he said, "where I come from, my ancestors once shared their world with creatures that could kill a person in less time than it takes to draw a single breath. Creatures far faster, far stronger, and far better equipped for violence than anything my ancestors carried into the wilderness with them. And for a very long stretch of our history, we did not have the tools to match them by strength alone." "And yet you survived," Draith said. "We survived," Hoyt agreed, "because we learned patience before we learned anything else. We learned to watch. We learned to wait. We learned the exact moment a predator commits to an approach and the exact moment it hesitates, and we built our entire understanding of survival around reading those moments correctly, because a single mistake meant we did not get to make a second one." He paused, glancing briefly toward the silent hall around them before returning his full attention to Draith. "You have tested my calm twice now, Elder," Hoyt continued, "once with words, once with presence. Both times I imagine you were looking for either fear or foolish bravado, because those are the only two responses your instincts recognize as familiar. But my calm is neither. It comes from knowing exactly what a true predator looks like, because my species spent thousands of years learning that lesson from creatures who very nearly ended us before we ever learned to stand back up." "And what did you learn?" Draith asked, his voice quieter now, the practiced formality of the ritual test slipping slightly to reveal something more genuinely curious beneath it. "We learned that the biggest threat in any room is rarely the loudest one," Hoyt said. "We learned to respect strength without ever mistaking it for something we could not eventually understand. And we learned, Elder Draith, that a species which survives long enough beside true predators eventually stops needing to fear them, not because the predators become weaker, but because the species learns exactly how strong it has become in return." The hall remained utterly silent. I found myself holding my own breath without realizing I had started, watching Draith's expression shift through something I could not entirely name, recognition perhaps, or the particular respect one apex creature reserves for another it has finally, fully understood. "You do not intend to fight me," Draith said slowly. "No," Hoyt said, "there is nothing here worth fighting over. You wanted to know what we are, Elder. I have told you plainly, the same way I told your hunter 3 days ago. I will not pretend to be smaller than I am to make this room comfortable, and I will not pretend to be larger than I am to satisfy your test. I am simply telling you the truth and trusting you to recognize it, because I believe you already have." For a long, suspended moment, nothing moved in that hall. Then Elder Draith did something that sent a visible ripple of astonishment through every delegate present, myself included, despite everything I had already suspected might happen. He stepped back, once, deliberately, the same careful retreat his young hunter had performed in that narrow corridor days before, except this time in front of the entire assembled Concord delegation, with nothing hidden and nothing left to interpretation. Then he lowered his head, not the small diplomatic incline he had offered Hoyt at the welcome gathering, but a full, unmistakable bow, the kind of gesture I had only ever read about in the oldest Threnzai historical records, reserved for the rarest acknowledgement their culture offered. "This assessment is complete," Draith said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "This Concord's records have called your species a beginner. I do not believe that word has ever fit you, Corporal, and I do not believe it fits your people either. You are not new to danger. You have simply chosen, for reasons your species clearly understands better than most, not to lead with it." He straightened, turning to address the presiding officer and the gathered delegates directly. "My pack withdraws any objection to this species' continued standing within the Concord," he said, "and I would advise every delegation in this hall to reconsider whatever assumptions your reports have offered you about them. I have hunted across more worlds than most of you have visited, and I have rarely met a species that carries itself the way this one does. Calm is common among the weak, who have not yet learned what danger feels like. It is far rarer among the strong, who have already met danger and simply decided they no longer need to announce it." With that, he turned and led his pack from the hall, their departure carrying none of the tension their arrival had, only a quiet, measured respect that seemed to settle over the entire room in their wake. The ceremony resumed shortly after, though I doubt anyone in that hall retained much memory of whatever formal words were exchanged following Draith's departure. My own attention remained fixed on Corporal Hoyt, who returned to his place among his crew with the same unhurried calm he had carried since the very first moment I met him on that observation deck, as though nothing remarkable had happened at all. I approached him afterward, once the hall had mostly emptied, finding him alone near the same viewport where our first conversation had taken place. "You knew," I said. "From the very beginning, you knew exactly what this was building toward." "I suspected," Hoyt said. "Elder Draith is not the first predator my people have met who needed convincing. He will likely not be the last either. Every new world we encounter seems to want the same reassurance, that we understand our place before they decide whether to grant us one." "And what is your place, Corporal, truly?" He considered the question for a long moment, watching the same star field beyond the viewport that had occupied his attention on the day we first met. "I do not think that is mine to decide alone, Princess," he said finally. "I think it is something every species figures out together, over time, the same slow way your father's council figures out its own assessments. But I will say this, my people have never needed to be the loudest predator in any room to survive one. We simply needed to be the ones who understood exactly what kind of room we were standing in, and we have had a very long time to practice that particular skill. I thought of my father's council, waiting for my assessment, certain of the conclusion they expected to receive. I thought of the archive's carefully trimmed summary and the vast unspoken history hidden just beneath its surface, and I thought of Elder Draith's full, unmistakable bow, offered to a species every official record in the galaxy had confidently placed at the very bottom of every list that mattered. I understood, finally, exactly what I intended to write in my report. Humanity was not a beginner species because it lacked strength. It was ranked as one because no one who wrote those reports had ever bothered to ask why a species capable of such calm chose to carry it so quietly, and what kind of history it takes to earn calm like that in the first place. I had come to this station believing I understood the shape of the galaxy's hierarchy, certain of exactly where every species belonged upon it. I left understanding something far more important instead, that the most dangerous beings in any room are rarely the ones who announce themselves the loudest, and that the deepest respect any predator can offer another is not fear. It is silence, and a single quiet step back,